The story of Red Rising takes place around 700 years from the present day. By the time Darrow enters the Institute, mankind has expanded across much of the solar system. Nearly every body of rock orbiting our sun, larger than a few dozen kilometers across, has seen a human's touch. However, we have watched the story of the Rising unfold through the eyes of soldiers and politicos, not scientists and explorers, so our view of all but a few of these planetary bodies are fuzzy at best. With that being said, here's all we do know about the solar system in the year 740 PCE, that's post-conquering era. This is the second and final part of this series and focuses on the bodies beyond Mars. If you are interested in the state of the inner ring of planets and their moons, I recommend you watch that video. Jupiter is the largest planet in the solar system. It's large enough to fit every other planet inside its bounds at once, large enough to fit 1,300 Earths. The budding astronomers among you will know that Jupiter is also the first gas giant we've reached in the series thus far. It is due mainly to this fact that the planet is uninhabitable. Made up of mainly helium and hydrogen, there is no solid ground on Jupiter, and with the minus 234 degree Fahrenheit clouds and 40,000 degree Fahrenheit core, even the master makers in the time of Darrow Au Andromedus could not subdue the giant. Despite the planet's ornery nature, many of her moons are still up for grabs. The four biggest, Ganymede, Callisto, Io, and Europa, known in our time as the Galilean moons, are known to Darrow as the Ilium. It is in these four moons that the power of the rim resides. These four moons all have populations exceeding 100 million and each have their own institute. In these moons also exist the most advanced shipbuilding capabilities anywhere in the solar system. Darrow says that Jupiter has 63 other moons, however this is a byproduct of the scientific limitations existing when the author wrote this particular passage. As of writing this, it is believed that Jupiter has 79 moons, all much smaller than those comprising the Ilium, and some as small as only 2 kilometers across. Or perhaps the missing few were at one point used as weapons and catapulted at the enemy, destroying both in the process, or used as momentum boosts as was done with Venus. The people of the rim are considered odd by those in the core. You can tell an inhabitant of the rim just by their look. They are slightly taller due to lower gravity, eyes slightly larger to absorb more light so far from the sun, and paler skin more resistant to solar radiation and to better absorb vitamin D. They stick to themselves and save visits to the core for official summons or special vacations. But even a blind man could tell if someone is from the rim. They act differently. While on Luna, honor is derived from the power of one sword arm and empty promises, in the rim it's a different ethos entirely. The entire culture is based around honor and merit. Unlike in the core where 3-year-old girls boss around 8-foot-tall obsidians, in the rim you have not earned the right to servants until you've earned your scar. When meals are served, they wait to eat to show they are above such primal notions as hunger. The golds of the rim still subscribe to the belief of the compact, that they are not above the other colors, just merely play different roles in the society. When rationing is in effect, the golds eat no more than the red farmers. Instead of the vitriol and pity with which the core golds address other colors, in the rim, they are treated with respect and honor. It is perhaps for these reasons that the Rising never grabbed hold in the rim. The innermost to Jupiter of the Ilium is Io. Slightly larger than Earth's moon, Io is known to us today as the driest astronomical object in the solar system. It is yellow due to the sulfur compounds and is pocked with volcanic scars. Thinking it too great a task to change the will of the entire moon, the early terraformers took a different approach to terraforming Io than we've seen elsewhere. Instead of striving to make the entire planet hospitable, the early Ionian settlers chose their battles wisely. Ice carved from Europa and enough dirt to cover millions of acres was imported to the planet. The atmosphere was thickened and massive pulse shields were erected over the now arable land to further protect from the elements. It is with these fields that Io earns its moniker of breadbasket to the rim. Sungrave, the crown and city of Io, was built into a hollowed-out mountain, the outside of which displays monumental sculptures of legendary creatures. Power for all these feats of engineering comes not from solar panels or helium-3 imports, but instead harvesting the tidal energy Io experiences caught between her Galilean sisters and Jupiter. All this effort goes into making Io one of the main seats of power beyond the core. Beyond the pulse shields and mountain escapes exists the same moon of ice and fire we see today, however. The moon sees temperatures of negative 200 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface and 3000 Fahrenheit near the volcanoes. expansive sulfur flats, cliffs, tectonic faults, volcanoes and their lava flows, and enough radiation to wither a man's DNA in hours. Io is also home to an institute. Our very own Mars Institute alumni names it the most brutal, and for good reason. As discussed here, the elements are not on your side on Io, and Ionian games can last for years. If Luna is Coruscant, Europa is Camino. It is a moon of oceans and archipelagos, but not the calm, temperate ones found on Venus. The Europan oceans are spiteful and angry, with great swells and massive waves and carved behemoth sea monsters. The bulk of the population of Europa seems scattered among these archipelagos, but floating cities and mountains can also be found on the ocean moon. Massive storms and hurricanes are regular occurrences on Europa, and are probably quite the experience at only 0.136 Earth gravity. Europa puts this water to good work though. Fish from her oceans combine with crops from Io to give the Ilium a well-balanced diet. Banking, deep-sea mining, and vacation homes round out the rest of Europa's industry. Europa has an institute, but besides that it exists, we know nothing about it. Ganymede is the industrial center of the rim. Like Luna and Phobos, it is described as a city moon, which would be quite the feat considering Ganymede is the largest moon in the solar system, bigger even than the planet Mercury. However, we see very little of it throughout the course of the series. Darrow claims metropolitan Ganymede is the center of the world in the rim, just like the court on Luna is the center of the core's world. It may also be the case that part of the moon is forested, which would set it apart from many of the other outer rim bodies. What we do know about Ganymede, however, is that it is famed for its dockyards. They are the most advanced in the solar system. While Venus may produce the most luxurious ships, Ganymede makes the biggest and the fastest. The bulk of the shipyards exist in geostationary orbits above the moon's surface. Ganymede also has its own institute, of which we again only know that it exists. Callisto is the second largest of the Ilium, but we know the least about it. We know that at least parts of it are wooded and it has an institute. Darrow describes it as little more than a factory of greys and obsidians. In that, it seems a parallel to Deimos, the smaller moon of Mars, a military garrison home to a society stronghold. In addition to the Ilium, Jupiter has dozens of other moons, of which only 2 have been mentioned. Sinope, a barren moon with a diameter of 35 kilometers, and Thebe, another barren moon, barely larger than Phobos, that used to be a mining colony and now acts as a military base. The 6th planet from the Sun is another gas giant planet. It does of course have its notable rings that, unlike Jupiter's, have a few sizable chunks that could at least house some hideouts or small mining outposts, although we have seen no evidence of this in the books. Saturn's satellite system is very lopsided. One moon, Titan, comprises more than 96% of the mass in orbit around the planet. The 6 other plain moons constitute roughly 4% of the mass, and the remaining 75 small moons, together with the rings, comprise only 0.04%. Around 40 years before Red Rising, the moons of Saturn rebelled. They are also frequently mentioned as potential allies for different factions in the core. These 2 facts indicate that there is at least some respectable level of industrialization and population out nearly 1 billion miles away from the Sun. We also know that Saturn Systems has multiple institutes, but we can only place one, that being Enceladus, a moon with a diameter of 504 kilometers. Rhea is the one Saturnian moon that readers should recognize the name of. The aforementioned moon rebellion didn't end until this particular moon was reduced to ash. Before being turned into a nuclear wasteland, Rhea was a stunning ice world where the Arch-Governor ruled from an ice throne in his famed glass palace. That same governor, though biased I'm sure, described his world as a heaven carved from a hell of ice. Now the icy and ashy corpse of Rhea haunts the skies of Saturn's other moons every night. The largest moon of Saturn, and the 2nd largest in the solar system, is Titan. It is larger than Mercury and devotes a significant part of that surface area to food production. Together with Io, the duo feeds the entirety of the rim. Saturn has 72 other moons, but we know little to nothing about the ones not named here. Instead of a gas giant, Uranus is referred to as an ice giant. But the result is the same, a completely uninhabitable planet with no resolute surface. However, a quote from Darrow that distinguishes Uranus from her moons hints that maybe there is some sort of atmospheric gas-collecting colonies, or large sail ships, or maybe even small cloud cities on Uranus itself. There is some sort of societal garrison around Uranus, but clearly not large enough to deter the Outrider raids. Uranus also marks the true start of the frontier of the solar system. At nearly 2 billion miles, or 2.9 billion kilometers from the Sun, it is further than we've seen any of our characters go in the book series. Uranus is believed to have 27 moons, but the only one we have seen mention of in the books is Ariel, and we only heard its reference in passing when it is said it has recently fallen victim to raids by outriders and marauders. The eighth and final planet is another ice giant and is almost 3 billion miles, or 4.5 billion kilometers from the Sun. We know less about Neptune than we do Uranus. The extent of our knowledge is that the moons of Neptune can put together enough ships and men to form a notable force. And we know that Neptune is still plagued by Asgmani raids. The only Neptunian moon we know anything about is hardly mentioned in the books. Instead, most of our knowledge comes from the graphic novels that follow Fichtner Albarca in his younger days, when he led a terraforming consortium. From his point of view, it is clear the moon is quite far away from being a comfortable vacation destination. The moon is a mean rock that requires constant encouragement and vigilance. The future proctor of House Mars was in charge of a Lovelock engine, known more widely as a storm god. Years later, back in the events of the books, there are also rumors of Sons of Ares bases on Triton. Not forgotten here is our ex-planet Pluto. While Uranus might be the start of the frontier, there is no question that Pluto is the true frontier. This dwarf planet ice waste is still in its early days of terraforming, and is where outcasts and political enemies are sent as a sort of sanctioned exile. Ceres is another dwarf planet between Mars and Jupiter. It acts mainly as a trade hub, but also has a garrison of society ships. It has a joint venture institute with Enceladus, but it is unclear what that means, considering the two are so far apart. Perhaps some sort of artificial station between the two, where students go to earn their scar, or something more similar to the academy we see in Golden Sun. Charon, Makemake, Waume, Eris, Quaoar, and Ultima Thule are all listed as trophies of Volsung Fa, the Asgmani warlord who lives beyond the Outer Rim. This tells us only that this collection of dwarf planets and large satellites are at least more than rock alone, probably minor outposts with nominal human activity. Charon, the most notable of those listed, is a satellite of Pluto. While probably embellished, the moniker Boneyard of Charon does hint towards a population at least large enough to fill a reasonable-sized yard with human remains. That brings us to the small body portion of the solar system. Within the bounds of the Kuiper Belt there exist millions of asteroids ranging from space dust to hundreds of kilometers in diameter. We know some of these are utilized by the Society. An asteroid city is named as possible shelter in Iron Gold, and the Society targets asteroid bases where Sons of Ares members train during the Rising. Darrow notes an asteroid-born accent from a blue pilot, and his own gold cover identity names him from a family from the asteroid clusters, hinting at a permanent or semi-permanent settling of at least some asteroids. The Astrodian Greek cluster and Astrodian Trojan cluster are a group of asteroids named as being home to an institute. However, they share the same orbital path as Jupiter, which probably means they are simply a hellscape for the Moon Lords to use as an institute, rather than inhabited rocks. Lacrimosa is a main belt asteroid named a number of times as one of a number of shady back-alley refueling stations and smuggling coves. These places, where life is cheaper than a kilo of iced helium and a gram of demon dust, are apparently rough enough to make even Severo Albarca wish to avoid the subject. Stations such as these are most likely no more than backwater gas stations with little surrounding infrastructure. There is also talk of large man-made structures within the asteroids. Hilda Station is a star-shaped trade hub in the core asteroid belt. It and its cluster of surrounding asteroids is home to its own institute. Towards the end of Dark Age, we hear talk of Oculus, a man-made superstructure home to an entire city designed by the master maker Glorastes. We will certainly see more of this structure in the 6th book. Finally, Volsung Fa names himself Overlord of the Kuiper Belt and Oort Cloud. However, this is most likely an empty title, like naming oneself ruler of the Sahara. The Kuiper Belt is a ring of asteroids on the outer edge of the solar system. If Pluto and her satellites are the frontier, that would make these small rocks virtually untouched by humanity. Further still, the Oort cloud is even further beyond and marks the edge of the Sun's influence and the end of our solar system. This collection of small and icy bodies that we today have hardly even proven real is almost certainly uninhabited if even explored in Red Rising. At the speed of space travel, even in the Red Rising universe, it would take years to travel any meaningful distance in the Kuiper Belt, and even longer to do so in the Oort cloud. All this evidence points to rather sparse inhabitants of the solar system asteroids. What people do inhabit these rocks are most likely workers mining or criminals hiding. The only real exceptions are usually man-made refueling stations that can sometimes be found in the vast distances between planets. And that brings us to the end of this tour of the solar system. As shown, in Red Rising, nearly 700 years in the future, most major solar bodies have been settled or explored, but one should not expect Amazon 2-day shipping beyond the moons of Saturn. The asteroids that orbit between Mars and Jupiter and those that orbit beyond Neptune see little more than hideouts and mining operations. Much like the story itself, most of the substance of humanity's solar spread is focused within the core planets, and beyond Mars is the start of the frontier where people are pale and pirates abundant. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I hope this has been informative.